Well, let's talk about the budget spending on defence, $8 billion over 5 years. Andrew Leslie is a retired Canadian Lieutenant General and former Liberal MP. He was the Deputy Commander of the NATO land forces in Afghanistan. He's been an outspoken critic of the military procurement process and the need for a major infusion of funding. General Leslie, good to see you again. Thanks for taking time to speak with me tonight. How satisfied are you with the commitments this budget makes to defence spending?
Completely unsatisfied.
Tell me why.
Since they've taken office, the Liberal government has reprofiled, reallocated, not spent over $12 billion that was promised to defense. So that $12 billion missing out of the defense envelope is now being replaced by $8 billion spread over 5 years, which is $1.6 billion a year. Each year, D&D doesn't spend $2 billion. So this is smoke and mirrors, point one. Point two is this gets us nowhere closer in an appreciable sense to spending 5%. And at a time when the Russian bear is savaging the Ukraine, slaughtering innocents, and the readiness of the Canadian Armed Forces has not been this bad in decades, $8 billion is not acceptable.
Okay, I mean, the new spending, you touched on it, the new spending will bring our spending to 1.5% of GDP on defense, still well below the NATO target of 2%. How do you think this will be viewed by NATO partners?
Not well. Canada right now is 10,000 troops short. That's about $1 billion, $1.5 billion per year. That's recurring. They're short of spare parts and ammunition and training facilities. That's at least another $1 billion per year, recurring over 5 years. 2 times 5 is 10. That's $10 billion right there over the next 5 years, just to bring them up to where they're supposed to be. That doesn't include the major new capital programs, which have been deferred or postponed or swept under the carpet over the last decade and are now urgently needed. And on top of that, we've got huge expenditures in the renewal of the North American Air Defense Agreement, which Canada has been delinquent on its payments for close to a decade.
Right. Part of the thrust of this budget is it's largely focused on North American concerns and the far north. And presumably that means, a greater commitment and resourcing of Canada's role in NORAD. What's urgently needed here?
Well, what's needed is any sort of defense capability up north. The Canadian Arctic is defenseless right now, and I'm not exaggerating. There are no permanently stationed troops there with any significant combat capability. There's no surveillance assets looking overhead. There's no drones that can stay up for hours. Our maritime patrol aircraft are, as old as I am, for goodness sake. We don't have ships that can operate up in the Arctic for any significant period of time. We have not started building those bases that the government's been talking about for 7 or 8 years. So if you look at the pie of the need, compared to, if you would, the tray of resources that are available to carry that pie, the math just doesn't compute. $8 billion, considering there's $12 billion that's already been missing from the account, doesn't square. Our allies are going to be furious.
The budget also announces a defense policy review to consider the changing global environment. It will look at the size of the forces, the role and resources. What do you believe it needs to come up with?
A defense policy review can either be a welcome thing or it can be a stall for time, so governments don't have to make decisions on investments. Quite frankly, I think what the Russian bear is doing and the tensions that have been exacerbated by a variety of factors over the last months between China and India and Brazil, all that points to essentially a resurgence of a Cold War, which in certain cases is hot. It doesn't take a lot of rocket scientists to figure out what's needed. Planes, which they've just ordered, they'll be 5 or 6 years getting delivered. Ships, which still haven't been confirmed. Refreshing of the Army equipment, more attention being paid to search and rescue, and the Arctic. The Arctic is a flank with Russia. Please, let's spend some real money on the Arctic to make sure that its future is secure, because right now it's defenseless.
Let's finish on this. You and I have talked about this before. Canada spends roughly $23 billion a year on defense, or should I say, and you've touched on it, allocates that amount because often the money isn't spent. You touched on this as well. The budget adds $1.6 billion a year more to that total. But it doesn't matter how much money there is really, right? If the old money isn't getting spent and new purchases are bogged down in an unworkable procurement system. Did you see anything in the budget about fixing that?
No, I did not, unfortunately. And there's only two people I now know who can fix it. One is the Prime Minister of Canada, and the other is the Minister of Finance. I've seen the budget procurement system work extremely quickly. At the height of the Afghan war, we went out and bought tanks and helicopters and heavy guns for the artillery and new light armored vehicles, which weren't light, and night vision systems and unattended aerial vehicles, and that goes on. And by the way, that was done with first a Liberal government and a Conservative government. So I know they can do it, but do they want to? Obviously not. They're pretty happy with the status quo, which means their defense capability is atrophied. Instead of investing appropriate funds just to start that healing process, they haven't even thrown them a lifeline. And though $8 billion sounds like a lot, it doesn't replace the 12 that's missing. So they're starting from a -4.
Okay. Andrew Leslie, thanks again tonight for your perspective on the budget unveiled today. Good to talk to you.
Thank you, Peter.